The Arcturian Council has spoken, and their decision reshapes your timeline. If that line lands in your chest like a small, sudden knock, pay attention. This is not casual noise. If you are open to hearing it, it's because something within you has already answered to an earlier call. You did not stumble onto this. You were found, and you were measured. The moment you receive these words is itself an alignment point. The message exists because your frequency matched a corridor through which they move. Listen as if you are settling into a chair made of light. Hear the cadence of what follows like a map drawn for your hands, a description of how you slipped into the orbit of a plan that is precise, purposeful, and quietly patient. I am here as an intermediary, to translate what was transmitted, to point out the markers, and to offer a few simple anchors you can use if you feel called. Nothing here is presented as proof of an external fact. This is an account of resonance, what was perceived, what was offered, and how you may notice the threads now woven through your days. The entry point was subtle. It did not arrive as thunder. It arrived as a retuning, a soft recalibration of your baseline. One moment you were living with a certain cadence. The next, the cadence itself became porous. The world around you thinned in places and thickened in others. You felt less like a passenger and more like an instrument being tuned. Strings loosening, a slight rise in pitch, the sense that a previous tension had been intentionally eased. That easing was not random. It was preparatory. You will recognize this pivot if you can recall a specific window of days or weeks when ordinary things began to feel turned toward you. Maybe a person you barely knew reached out with information that landed as instruction. Maybe a line of work that had been stalled opened a narrow door. Maybe a pattern of dreams became less chaotic and more directional. These are all variations on the same signal, your timeline registering as a viable channel for a larger architecture. There are indicators you can feel, quiet and precise. Notice how your intuition tightened like a lens, not simply more frequent gut feelings, but clearer, edged, and sometimes insistently directional. Sense how synchronicity stopped being comforting repetitions and started to point you. Observe times when events compressed. Choices that previously took months to unfold began to resolve within days, as if the universe collapsed several options down into a single, clearer path. Pay attention to emotional unravelings that had a purpose, sudden griefs or releases that left a new space inside you, a space that felt designed rather than accidental, and feel the steady, often invisible stabilization under your ribs, a presence that steadied you through otherwise destabilizing shifts. If any of this stirs recognition, allow a small, quiet affirmation.
If it feels right, you can say aloud, simply and without expectation, "I accept my entry into the Arcturian plan." This phrase is not a contract. It is a verbal anchor, a signal to your own nervous system that you are choosing to notice. Use it only if it lands naturally. It is optional, not mandatory. You might ask, why you? Why was your frequency singled out among billions of living fields? The Arcturians, in what they shared, described selection as an alignment of multiple coordinates, emotional bandwidth that could tolerate expansion, a coherent inner field that did not splinter with every shock, a responsiveness to subtle correction, and a connection, sometimes latent, sometimes active, with a future self who had already begun to steer. In simpler language, you had both the internal material and the relational openness that would allow the architecture they intended to anchor in and through you. Do not mistake this for a statement of worthiness in a moral sense. The criteria are technical and experiential, resonance, readiness, and a measure of directedness. It is as if a lighthouse chooses a shoreline by the lay of the rocks and the firmness of the soil beneath. You were chosen because your ground could hold a node. Expect to find evidence in small domestic places as much as in grand outward events. A neighbor's aside becomes a precise nudge. An article you never meant to read lands like a directive. A dream that seemed like ordinary symbolism offers a phrase that now functions as a pivot. An old name, a street you had forgotten, an image you carry forward as a breadcrumb. Those breadcrumbs are not random. They are carefully sown by a coordinating intelligence that prefers economy and subtlety to spectacle. After the initial pivot, there is a pulling. It does not announce itself with banners. It anchors itself through patterns that repeat until you respond. The first signs of being pulled are often experienced as an intensification of timing. You may wake certain days with a sense of precise urgency, not panic, but an inner call that suggests with unusual clarity the next correct step. Synchronicities stop feeling like coincidences and begin to feel like directions, numbers that keep appearing at exact moments, faces that show up at the right time, a series of small confirmations that create pressure toward a single choice. Another sign is relational pruning. You will notice that some people in your life begin to feel out of phase, not necessarily in a dramatic way. Often it is quieter. Conversations that used to land now feel empty, or they move into arguments over values you no longer share. Simultaneously, new people arrive who understand the language of your changes better than old companions do. This rearrangement is not a punishment. It is a strategic clearing of pathways so that the field around you can hold higher coherence. There is often an emotional hollowing that precedes a task.
It can be mistaken for loss, but in the Council's framing, it is preparation. Old identifications fall away. Rules that once defined you become less sticky. That sense of being unmoored, of losing certain anchors, is an essential step. It creates an energetic room in which new patterns can be erected. The Arcturians referred to this as making structural space. It felt clinical in their language, but in lived terms it is experienced as a letting go. Weary attachments unfasten, and you are left with a simpler center. Acceleration follows. Decisions that might have once required long deliberation now shorten. Pathways that were once speculative find acceleration, as if the cosmos itself compresses potential and fast-forwards the relevant scenes. Along with compression, there is an expansion of perception. Not more information poured in at all times, but rather a widening of your ability to detect precise resonances in the stream of events. Your destiny receptors, as they described them, begin to tune. Where before you registered only mood and weather and the immediate needs of life, you now begin to perceive directional contours that feel like the shoulders of a future self moving toward you. That future self is not metaphorical in the way this tradition often uses the term. The Arcturians frame it as a functional interface, a version of you that exists on a slightly shifted timeline with access to choices you have yet to make. When the Council speaks of bridging to the future self, they mean establishing a pathway where information, tone, and patterning flow back and forth. You may notice fragments of decisions before you are called to act, or a sudden inner conviction that arrives with the certainty of hindsight. These are not fatalistic shadows. They are invitations to cohere around a trajectory that your higher timeline has already shaped. All of this, the lensing of intuition, the directional synchronicities, the emotional clearing, the acceleration, is part of a preparatory sequence. The Arcturians described it as necessary conditioning. They do not move into a field without first ensuring that the host systems can tolerate and transmit the frequencies involved. Think of it as a careful check of capacity. The emotional matrix must be stable. The nervous system must be able to receive without flaring into trauma. The identity structures must not resist so fiercely that stabilization becomes impossible. To be clear, none of this demands perfection. It demands pliancy and honesty. Some people respond with a quiet acceptance, others with suspicion, others with fear. Each response is observed by the coordinating field with moral judgment. The measure is functional. Can the individual system support the node that will be required of them? If so, the Council moves with greater subtlety around that life. If not, the approach is slower, more limited, or redirected.
You may wonder how, in practical terms, the Arcturians enact such recalibration without apparent direct interference. Their transmissions arrive as repatterning cues rather than heavy-handed edits. They work through field dynamics, nudging emotional thresholds, amplifying intuitive bandwidth, catalyzing identity shedding, and stimulating what they called destiny receptors, an embodied sensitivity to future-directed cues. The language they used was technical in parts, poetic in others, but the upshot was consistent. They scaffold the person, then the person scaffolds the timeline. This scaffolding often starts inside the smallest container of your life. A morning ritual shifts slightly. A breath practice that once felt neutral now resonates with a different tonal key. You may find your attention drawn to tasks that are oddly specific and feel like exercises. An old meditation, when revisited, becomes suddenly more fertile. Childhood memories that had been dormant surface with clarity, not as mere nostalgia, but as functional activations, recallings that plug a missing wire into a new circuit. These memory activations are not random. They are targeted keys, intended to restore capacities the human emotional system had lost or set aside. When these inner shifts accumulate, you begin to act differently in the world. You do fewer things, and you do them with a different quality. Your choices thin outward into a clearer vector. In that thinning, your presence becomes a stabilizing point, a node. The Arcturians spoke of nodes as compact lighthouses, localized fields that emit coherence into surrounding systems. As one node strengthens, neighboring possibilities refract around it, and the local future lexicon adjusts. You are being asked, in essence, to become such a lighthouse, steady, frequency-specific, and consistent over time. There is often a test embedded in becoming a node. It is not a test administered like an exam, but a sustained pressure. Can you maintain equanimity when the outer world resists the inner alignment? Can you keep your field steady when relationships fray or when material pressures increase? These resistances are part of the pruning process. They are not punishments, they are opportunities to demonstrate the field's durability. The Council watches how your field responds, not to judge you morally, but to evaluate structural stability.
You may be feeling some of these pressures now in muted form. Perhaps a project resisted you until suddenly it did not, or a heartache dissolved into a quiet, useful grief that allowed you to move differently. Maybe an old belief no longer felt like ground. These are not failures, they are necessary erosions that open the substrate for reconstruction. If at this point you feel an internal movement, a tightening in the chest, a rise of something like hope mixed with trepidation, allow a second verbal anchor to help consolidate the awareness you are gaining.
If it resonates, you might gently say, "I acknowledge the preparation within me." Again, this is optional. The phrase is a marker for your nervous system, a way to give language to the subtle shifts that often otherwise go unnamed. Speak it only if it feels like an honest reflection, and not as an attempt to force belief. There is a temptation at this juncture to seek grand narratives. We are trained as humans to turn pattern into story. Do not conflate narrative elegance with operational clarity. The work the Arcturians described is not theatrical, it is architectural. It is less about spectacular intervention and more about adjusting the plumbing through which destiny flows. This explains their preference for small surgical adjustments rather than thunderous displays. Because their approach is so understated, you may miss vital signposts if you expect drama. Look instead for precision. A phone call at exactly the right hour. A recurring set of numbers with a timing you cannot attribute to coincidence. A memory that surfaces at the precise moment you need a missing key. An emotion clearing that makes room for a different kind of decision. These are the low-key instruments by which the Council conducts its work. And yet, within this deliberate economy, there is room for wild inner openings. Sometimes the system accelerates so quickly that the sense of being guided becomes unmistakable. You may experience intense clarity about a relationship that must shift, or feel compelled to move in a way you previously would have never considered. When that happens, it is a sign that your node is engaging more powerfully with a broader field. You are not being forced, you are being offered leverage, an ability to act in short order that threads into an unfolding that extends beyond individual intention. At the threshold of action, you may also notice physical correspondences, not miraculous healings or promises of extraordinary fortune. Those are not the language of this work, but subtle somatic integration. Sleep patterns recalibrate. A recurring tension in your shoulders may soften. You may feel a steadier heartbeat in moments of stress. These are bodily signatures of energetic stabilization. The system is learning to hold a new bandwidth. Attend to them as you would to any useful feedback. Observe, do not overinterpret, and tend to your well-being. Energy work is complementary, not replacement for medical care or psychological support. If anything in your body signals alarm, consult trained professionals. So far, we have traced how you entered the plan, the signs that you are being pulled, and the internal changes that enable transition. We have touched on future self interfaces and the creation of nodes. What remains less seen is the choreography behind the scenes, the quiet orchestration that allows shifts to become durable. That choreography involves synchronization of events, subtle realignments of relationships, and the activation of memory architectures that were dormant until called. It is not the sort of control that eradicates freedom. It is the kind that creates pathways wide enough for free will to move through with less friction. It is useful to imagine their work as a kind of pruning and rewiring. Pruning removes unnecessary or obstructive timelines that would scatter energy. Rewiring reroutes attention and deepens receptivity to precise cues. The Arcturians spoke of this as a kind of timeline hygiene practice, removing redundant branches so the main trunk can thicken. Remember, these are metaphors converted into functional terms. They are meant to help you feel the process rather than to claim literal mechanics. There will be moments when you experience a small collapse of possibility, a timeline folding, not out of malicious interest, but out of practical necessity. 100 small options condense into one path that supports higher coherence. The sensation can be at once relieving and terrifying. You might feel a loss of potential, even as you gain precision. This is inherent to the work of anchoring. When a node activates, it reduces certain freedoms in exchange for stronger directional power. This trade is not trivial, and it is not required of everyone. It is offered to those whose systems can carry it, and who have opted in by resonance. You are not alone in this corridor. There are others, sometimes nearby, sometimes scattered, whose fields are aligning with similar architecture. The Council's plan, as they described it, is not to convert masses overnight, but to seed a pattern of nodes whose coherence will expand organically. Each node functions like a small stabilizing influence within a larger emergent web.
Over time, the web influences broader conditions, not by coercion, but by the steady accumulation of organized frequency. As you sit with these descriptions, a practical question may arise. What do you do now? Small, repeatable practices matter far more than dramatic gestures. Keep your attention on consistency. Tend to your emotional regulation. Anchor yourself in simple daily patterns that support receptivity. A few moments of quiet each morning, pauses before key decisions, gentle practices that calm the nervous system. When choices appear, notice whether they align with a felt sense of forwardness, a lightness, a clarity, a tightening of direction, rather than with old habits of reactivity. When you are called to mark the moment, use the anchors as tools, not talismans. Use them to name what is happening in your system. If it fits, speak the phrase that acknowledges your entry. If you feel the preparation inside you, name that too. These linguistic acts are small commitments to attention. They are not contracts with cosmic guarantors. They are invitations to personal coherence.
There is, beneath all the practicalities, an emotional contour you should recognize. Many people feel a mixture of excitement and fear. Curiosity and resistance can coexist. That is normal. The Council does not aim to bypass your agency by creating illusions of certainty. Your decision to participate in any degree is the leverage that turns signal into lived effect. Hold that tension, the bright possibility and the sober caution, as you continue. There is much more to the Council's plan than the preparatory work we have explored so far. They described, in their transmissions, a series of structural moves that extend beyond individual recalibration, coordinated node creation, emotional system reconstruction at scale, and a grafting process that deepens connection between present beings and their future timelines. Those elements are weighty and will require careful handling, which is why they shared them only with those whose fields were ready. For now, pause and breathe with the awareness that you are at an entry point. In the quiet that follows, observe the precise sensations you have been experiencing over recent weeks and months. Which of them line up with the markers I have described? Which of them feel new? Which of them feel like confirmations? There is a moment coming when the outer choreography will become more visible. It will not come as a single trumpet call, but as a sequence of confirmations, small directional events that stitch together into a discernible pattern. Some will be relational. An old contact returns with a message you needed to hear. Some will be logistical. An opening appears where none was expected. Some will be internal. A memory activation yields practical insight. Pay attention to their timing. The Council works not by imposing narratives, but by creating conditions under which your capacity to choose is enhanced. When that larger choreography moves toward you, you will know it by a tightening of the compass inside you. The compass will calibrate, and the direction it points will no longer be ambiguous. In that tightening lies your invitation to become steadier, to carry more, to transmute personal change into collective coherence. The next layer of this transmission involves the hidden background work that was operating in your life long before the moment of disclosure. They do this quietly, through soft alignments and through subtle synchronizations. In many lives, the evidence of such work appears as a cluster of small, uncanny accommodations, a sequence of dates that line up, a set of conversations that follow a precise arc, memories surfacing with perfect timing. It is this invisible choreography that generates the conditions for nodes to form and hold. You may feel, even now, the beginnings of a pattern awakening in your daily life. Attend to it with curiosity rather than urgency. There will be a time to act decisively, but that time is measured by the stabilizing of internal structures, not by external pressure. Allow this awareness to sit with you. Allow it to move in your body. Let the knowledge that you were prepared before you realized it be both humbling and reassuring. As you continue to track these shifts, keep a record if it helps. Small notations of odd coincidences, bits of dream dialogue, days when decisions collapsed into clarity. These records are not a talisman. They are evidence for your own nervous system that the work is real on an experiential level. When you look back months from now, these notes will read like coordinates that chart the formation of a node. At some point soon, if your field remains coherent, you will be invited to another kind of discipline, one that moves from internal calibration to external anchoring. That is the point where questions solidify into responsibilities. You will be asked to hold attention in ways that are steady and unglamorous, that require little fanfare but consistent presence. For many, this will feel like a quiet appointment with destiny, a daily practice, a gentle stewardship, a form of service that reconnects the local with a larger emergent pattern. There is no need to rush into that role today. The present is for observation and small, steady preparation. Let the anchors you have used so far be simple waypoints. If it feels appropriate, repeat them softly in moments of stillness, knowing they are invitations rather than commands. Soon, the narrative will move toward what the Arcturian plan materially intends to do on the world stage of timelines, but that is not the urgent matter of this hour. Right now, the urgent matter is your internal readiness, the manner in which you can accept, stabilize, and translate the subtle currents into steady action. Keep your feet steady, your breath even, and your attention kind. A final note before we slow into the pause that allows the next layer to arrive. Do not mistake subtlety for weakness. The Council's method is deliberate because subtlety breeds durability. When resonance is gentle and sustained, it has a greater capacity to transform without shock. You are being invited into a long game of refinement, not a brief contest of force. If your chest warmed at any of this, if the idea of a protected field and deeper transmission stirred the muscles around your heart, there is a space for deeper support. There is an optional protected circle where transmissions are delivered with more specificity, and where practices for stabilization and timeline recalibration are offered in a held environment. If you feel that small pang of recognition, you can find the link in the description below. It is there as a resource for those who feel called, not a requirement for the work to proceed. The Council does not make membership mandatory.
They invite resonance, and the circle is a place to practice the discipline of steady attention. Now breathe. Rest in the quiet that follows this unfolding. The next stage of disclosure moves from the personal terrain we have covered into the Council's hidden techniques, how they prune timelines, synchronize events, activate memory signals, and begin the process of node multiplication across a wider field. Those teachings are nearer than you think, and they will demand precise attention when they arrive. For now, hold what you have been given as a map, not as a script. The map points to openings. Your steps will fill the path. The next currents of this transmission move from description into technique, the soft mechanics the Council uses so that the shifts you have felt take on a certain longevity. These are not demonstrations of power, they are refinements of process. Imagine a gardener who prunes not to force a plant outward, but to reorient growth inward, toward fruit-bearing branches. Imagine an engineer who repatches a conduit so current flows with less turbulence. That is the tone of the work you are being invited into. Start with the pruning. The Arcturians employ what they called selective timeline pruning, an economy of possibility that favors coherence over scattering. In practical terms, this shows up as a narrowing of choice that you experience internally as relief or as loss. The Council reduces the number of parallel what-ifs that tug at your attention, not by removing freedom, but by simplifying the landscape so that your will can be used with higher fidelity. You may notice this as an end to chronic indecision, or as opportunities aligning in a way that makes certain paths self-evident. This is not a destiny forced upon you. It is a clearing that allows intention to translate into fewer, clearer acts. Alongside pruning, there is synchronization, the Council's method of layering events so that moments echo one another across the field of your life. They work with timing like a composer works with rhythm. A conversation in the morning harmonizes with an email at lunch and a dream at night. Each element is tuned to the same key. This is why you sometimes wake with a phrase in your mouth that later appears in a text you receive. These joints of correspondence are not random, but engineered nodal points designed to create resonance. Their aim is to produce a chorus of confirmations that your nervous system reads as signal rather than noise. Memory activation is another discrete technique. The Council does not invent memories, it awakens capacities that were once operative and then obscured. You might recall unexpectedly a practical skill your grandmother taught you, or the exact cadence of a childhood ritual that now repurposes as a stabilizing tool. These activations are like finding a spare key to a locked room. Once you have it, certain operations become easier because you no longer have to relearn from scratch.
Often, these memories arrive as fragments, a single scent, a half-remembered sentence, an image that blooms and then fades, but their effect is cumulative. They reconnect the present to lost competencies, ways of steadiness, patterns of attention, emotional languages that once served you well. Because the Council's work is systemic, it also involves micro-adjustments to relationships, not as punishment, not as moral judgment, but as structural alignment. People who cannot carry the increased coherence of your field may drift away, and new people with matching frequency may arrive. Sometimes these changes are dramatic. A friendship dissolves and a mentor appears in the same month. More often they are quiet. Your conversations shift in tone. You notice who can match the new language of your life and who cannot. This relational editing is part of creating a stable circumference around a node. The Arcturians favor integrity of field over wide, noisy popularity. They are seeking points of concentrated steadiness, not scattering centers. You should expect, as part of this choreography, small collapses of possibility. These are not punishments. They are practical compressions that allow energy to be directed rather than dissipated. Where once 10 options tugged, the system presents 3. Where once you saw a dozen shimmering directions, you now perceive one that retains the highest potential for coherence. The sensation can be equal parts loss and relief. Honor both feelings. They mean the structure is tightening, not to trap you, but to provide leverage for more effective action. When the Council multiplies nodes, they do so not in a broadcast but by a patterned seeding. One node strengthens, its field radiates, and adjacent fields are nudged toward compatibility. This is not a reckless expansion. It is a choreography of mutual support. Think of nodes like wells drilled in arid landscape. Each one changes local hydrology, making neighboring spots easier to cultivate. As nodes multiply, local conditions, communities, workplaces, neighborhoods become incrementally more receptive to higher coherence patterns. Over years, that accumulation can alter certain collective tendencies without theatrical display. The Arcturians prefer that the gradual accretion of stability create durable change rather than momentary spectacle. Part of their larger design involves what they called emotional system reconstruction. Human emotional systems evolved in conditions very different from those we now inhabit. Trauma, cultural narratives, and repeated alarm responses can make your field noisy or reactive. The Council's transmissions aim to rescale emotional regulation at the field level. This is not a bypass of your mature work in therapy or bodily care. Rather, it is an overlay that supports emotional operations in more finely graded ways.
You may begin to notice that your reactivity is tempered, that grief has a different texture, that joy does not vacillate as wildly. These are subtle calibrations, not instant miracles. They are more akin to retuning a violin than replacing it. Closely tied to emotional system reconstruction is the restoration of intuition as a disciplined capacity. Before this calibration, intuition often arrives in fragments, in moods, or in hints that feel unreliable. The Council refines intuitive bandwidth so that it functions more like a compass and less like a flickering candle. The shift is felt as greater discriminative clarity, knowing the difference between a passing urge and a guidance that has the weight of future hindsight. The Arcturians described practices, small, repeatable tonal exercises, that help stabilize this sensing. They spoke of breath patterns, of attention holds, of micropauses before decisive acts. These are not exclusive rituals. They are ways to train the system to accept and relay the higher frequencies they introduce. A central motif in the transmissions is the future self bridge. This is not mystical wishful thinking. It is a practical interface, a systematic way for a slightly more advanced timeline version of you to feed back tone, intention, and patterning into the present. When the bridge is open, you experience anticipatory knowing, not prophecy, not coercion, but a felt sense of the shape of decisions that will best support coherence. Imagine your future self dialing in to whisper shape and rhythm, like a coach offering pointers while you still learn a craft. The flow is bidirectional. Your present actions influence the future self's viability. The future self supplies practical tonal cues that help you choose with more precision. This bridge is established slowly and sustainably. Early markers are fragmentary, a sudden conviction about a small choice that later proves apt, a recurring dream that resolves into a real-world improvement. Later, as the bridge strengthens, you may receive impressions that accompany tangible opportunities, a business conversation that aligns with a seeded pattern, an artistic impulse that becomes a linchpin, a meeting that rearranges next steps. The Council emphasizes that these are invitations, not orders. Your agency remains central. The bridge enhances capacity to choose. It does not remove choice. Within this architecture, the role you are being asked to play becomes clearer. The Council describes several functions you may embody over time: stabilizer, transmitter, timeline corrector, bridge, and anchor. Each of these roles contains a practical component and a tonal component. The stabilizer is steady under pressure, maintaining composure and clarity when surrounding fields fray. The transmitter carries the pattern with clean amplitude. Your presence resonates and helps others attend.
The timeline corrector gently redirects errant potentials,
nudging choices toward higher coherence without coercion. The bridge is the practical channel to future self-inputs. The anchor holds the node in place, resisting dispersal. You will not be asked to embody all roles at once. The Council often assigns one primary function that aligns with your capacities and life context. Perhaps you will be primarily a transmitter in your workplace, a stabilizer within your family, or a bridge within a local cohort. The field may also rotate your emphasis over months or years as needed. Each role requires practice more than heroism, showing up regularly, keeping your nervous system tended, and maintaining a simple set of habits that preserve your frequency. Part of practical training is learning how to sustain equanimity under pressure. The Council evaluates durability as much as sensitivity. Durability is not grit in the sense of forcing through overwhelm. It is the capacity to return to neutral without cascading into drama. You can build this capacity with small disciplines, steady breathing, brief pauses before responding, and micro-restorative acts that recalibrate your attention. These are humble practices, but they compound. The Arcturians favor low-ceremony endurance over grand gestures, because a life lived steadily is a life that can hold a node. There will be tests, not designed to harm you, but to measure how your field responds when edges are pushed. These tests often arrive as ordinary life stressors refracted through the new architecture: financial pressure, miscommunications, sudden logistical obstacles. Their function is diagnostic. Do you re-establish center, or do you fracture? Notice the difference and use it as data, not as moral indictment. The Council reads such data to determine how to calibrate further: more support, a slower seating, or a different kind of scaffolding. As you absorb this, remember the ethical contour of the work. The Arcturians emphasize consent and clarity. Their interventions are offered to systems that resonate. They are not forced upon those who do not. If something in you recoils, that recoil is taken seriously by the coordinating field. You are never required to proceed. A reversed or slowed approach is a valid, respected consequence of your autonomy. Why now? The timing of disclosure intersects 3 timelines: the personal, the relational, and the emergent collective threshold. On a personal level, sufficient internal readiness, a blend of emotional bandwidth, coherent field, and future self-activation, creates windows where the Council's methods can be effective. Relationally, the surrounding field may have crossed a compatibility threshold. Enough adjacent nodes may be forming to make your participation meaningful. Collectively, a broader shift in ambient frequency creates an opportunity to seed more durable changes without overwhelming systemic friction. The alignment of these layers opens a corridor that was previously closed. That is why this message came to you at this particular juncture. It is important to stress that this timing is not destiny's demand. It is an invitation synchronized to capacity. If you decline, the Council adapts. If you accept partially, the field calibrates to what you can sustainably carry. The work values longevity over immediacy. It would rather progress slowly with consent than accelerate without integrity. There are practical tools they offer to help you anchor this phase. None are miraculous. They are daily attentions, composed so your system learns new habits. Keep a log of small confirmations, a sentence per day noting anything uncanny or direction-giving. Do micro-pauses before key choices. Even 10 breaths can transform reactivity into discernment. Revisit a simple centering practice each morning, a brief breath hold followed by a naming of intention for the day. These small rituals are not magic bullets. They are training modules for the nervous system that help the Council's transmissions find stable purchase. If you feel called to use the verbal anchors, treat them as optional signposts. They are brief and meant to be practical, markers that speak to your own system rather than to an external authority. You have already been offered 2. One final anchor completes the sequence. If it resonates, you may say quietly in your own voice, "I align with the Arcturian plan moving through my life." Use it as you would a mantra, only if it sits true in your chest. It is a consolidating phrase, not a contractual clause. Speak it only when it feels genuine. There will be times when doubt rushes in, when the adjustments feel like erosion, when old fantasies of autonomy whisper that you are being coerced. Allow those doubts space. Questioning and skepticism are part of healthy discernment. The Council encourages inquiry because consent cannot be manufactured by silence. If you run into persistent unease, seek dialogue with trusted guides or professionals who can help clarify what you are feeling. This work is meant to integrate with other forms of support, not to replace them. As you move toward public-facing action, when the node must anchor outward, bear in mind that the Arcturians favor quiet competence. You will not be asked to perform spectacle. You will be asked to be consistent. Consistency is the vector of influence, showing up steady, holding your center, and applying small practices that preserve frequency.
In social context, choose clarity over persuasion. Model steadiness instead of arguing for it. Your field will do the persuasive work more effectively than any rhetoric you could deploy. There is also a communal dimension. Nodes are stronger when they are networked. You may find yourself drawn to others who resonate with this architect.
These are not cultic circles. They are functional collaborations in which people learn to hold one another's practice. If you decide to join an intentional support group, look for one that prioritizes emotional regulation practices, clear consent, and a respectful pacing of transmissions. The protected member circle mentioned earlier is designed around those principles. It offers a held environment for deeper transmissions, personalized alignment sessions, and guided timeline recalibration practices. Participation is optional and oriented toward those who want more frequent, held touchpoints as their node strengthens. If you choose to participate in a supported circle, expect 3 practical benefits delivered with restrained frequency: deeper transmissions that explore timing and patterning in more detail, alignment sessions focused on stabilizing the nervous system and strengthening your field, and structured timeline recalibration practices that help you integrate the council seeding into daily life. These are supports, not accelerants. They are tools for practice and not a ticket to guarantee. Remember that the council's plan is not a blueprinted takeover of life. It is an architecture of possibility. It asks you to steward your agency with care. You will always have the freedom to pivot, to recalibrate, to decline. The council's preference is for partners who act from capacity rather than from compulsion. In the weeks and months that follow this moment, continue to track small signs. Keep a loose ledger of confirmations without turning them into obsession. Note the ways your decisions begin to shorten in time from intention to action. Observe whether relationships adjust their tone. Notice whether memory activations arise with useful utility. All of these are the evidence the council uses to evaluate the next practical steps. A few reminders for practical safety. Do not abandon professional care for energetic work. If you are engaged in medical or psychological treatment, continue it. Use these transmissions as complementary sensibilities to your established support structures. If any internal or somatic signal escalates into alarm, consult a trained provider. The council's work is meant to live alongside ordinary evidence-based supports, not in opposition. You are entering a long game. The advantage of a patient method is that it accumulates. A small habit repeated over years yields compounds that appear suddenly as ease and grace. The council's transmissions are optimized for that kind of accrual. They seed practices that compound with attention, so that what appears incremental at first becomes, over time, a new baseline for living with steadiness. If you have been resisting the notion of being chosen because it feels grandiose or burdensome, give yourself permission to be ambivalent. The council does not require you to be a hero overnight. It invites you to become reliable. Reliability is the humble alchemy at the heart of lasting transformation. In the spirit of offering a concrete step now, return to the small practices that support clarity. Breathe deeply. Sit for 5 minutes with your back supported and your eyes soft. Name silently one thing you will give attention to this week that aligns with the sense of forwardness in your chest. It need not be a project monumental in scale. It could be a conversation you have been postponing, a small piece of organization, or the resumption of an old practice. Choose one and let your action be modestly significant. If after reading this you feel the faint stirrings of recognition, a soft uplift in the chest, a tightening of inner compass, hold that without rushing. Let it be an ember that you tend through steady care. If you are drawn to deeper health practice, the Protected Member Circle is available as an optional resource. It provides deeper transmissions that expand clarity, alignment sessions that help stabilize your field, and timeline recalibration practices for integrating new patterns. The circle exists for those who feel called and is expressly framed as support, not a requirement. Finally, take a moment to center. Acknowledge the preparation you have already lived through. Notice that, even in the small things of your day, something has shifted. You were prepared not because of merit in the moral sense, but because your system had the textures necessary to hold what the council offered. That fact should feel both humbling and empowering. If you choose to use the last anchor as a consolidating phrase, speak it softly and only if it aligns with your sense of truth. I align with the Arcturian plan moving through my life. Let the words serve as a naming of intent rather than as a binding decree. When you step away from this message, do so lightly. Carry the practical pieces with you, the daily attentions, the log of small confirmations, the micro pauses before choice, and let the rest unfold in time. The council works patiently. You too can move with patience. Be gentle with your fear, curious about the signs, and steady in your practices. The Arcturians have spoken. Their decision shifts certain contours of timeline architecture, but it does not erase your freedom. It offers you a scaffold on which to place your attention and your action. If this felt resonant and you want held support as you integrate, the Member Circle offers deeper transmissions, alignment sessions, and timeline recalibration practices, a contained field for those who seek steady acceleration. If not, continue with the small disciplines already described. They are sufficient to carry you forward. Rest for a moment. Breathe. Then, when you are ready, re-enter your day with the soft knowledge that something in you was prepared long before you realized. This is not an ending, but a turning, a measured opening into a work that values subtlety, durability, and consent.
Keep your feet steady, your attention clear, and your heart willing.